Well, welcome everybody. Tonight we're talking about the countdown to college, a crucial checklist for high school seniors. My name is Dolin, and for the last 25 years, my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants, like Kristin, have been helping kids to do better in school and to get into the college of their choice. And I can think of nobody better to talk about this really, really important topic for seniors this evening than Kristin Landis. So Kristin, welcome. So glad that you're here tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Anne.
Absolutely. And Kristin is a college consultant with us here at Educational Connections, and we are so lucky to have her. And I know her students feel the same way. Kristin has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Richmond and a law degree from Emory University in Atlanta. And Kristin worked at University of Virginia in college admissions for 11 years, where she evaluated over 10,000 applications, both in-state applications, out-of-state, and those of international candidates. So, Kristin, we're talking about our seniors tonight, and we all know that it is crunch time. It's go time for our seniors. Tell us a little bit about how everybody's feeling, all the kids you work with, and where everybody is during this crunch time.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right, Anne. We are here. It is September 7th, and we are in the throes of it. A lot of application deadlines are already starting for a lot of the Southern schools in October. So my students are busy at work, completing Common Apps, writing essays, getting all those activity lists done and all those little things that need to be done to get those applications in, as we still continue to have conversations about what students want in a college experience, what's a right fit for them. So yes, this is now more than ever is the time to get started. So I'm so glad we're having this tonight.
And Kristin, I know things have changed quite a bit in the last 2 years, and we're seeing that application volumes are higher than ever before, and they're continuing to rise. Talk a little bit about the current state of admissions.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, Anne, you and I have talked about this in webinars over the last year. Since the pandemic, we've seen an exponential rise in applications. The Common App alone saw a 30% increase since 2020. But now we're out of the pandemic. We're a couple of years out, and so last year there was about a 7.5% increase in applications. So still rising, but not to the exponential amounts they were in the last 2 years. So what this equates to in college admissions is what obviously people would think is that acceptance rates have gone down, and they've gone down drastically since 2020. Schools, Ivy League schools, MIT caliber schools, maybe 10 years ago had 10% acceptance rates. We're now looking at 3, 4, 5% acceptance rates. Other schools, second tier type schools, where they maybe had a 20 to 30%, we're down in those 10 to 15%. So we are seeing a substantial decrease in acceptance rates. NYU just this past year had 120,000 applications. Which is just, if you think about it, mind-boggling. In the time when I was at UVA and I started in 2010, we had about 24,000 applications. When I looked at their numbers this past year, they had over 56,000 applications. So a substantial increase, but really they only had about a 4% increase from last year. Virginia Tech also only saw about a 4% increase from last year, whereas from 2018 to now, there was like a 47% increase. So again, we're starting to level off. So then the question you ask is why? Why is this happening? And there's a number of reasons why this has happened. One is that we live in a test optional landscape. I think everyone on the webinar knows now about test optional landscape. So about 80% of schools still have where you don't have to submit scores. So students feel a little more emboldened to apply, to cast a wider net, to apply to more schools. So you're seeing that. You're also seeing colleges have made a real conscious effort to attract underrepresented groups. So just this past year, you've seen a 31% increase in underrepresented minorities and first gens. Also, because of the pandemic, schools just do a better job virtually in getting their name out, having students understand that experience. So now you don't necessarily have to go visit a school to get a little bit of an idea about a school. So, but I don't want people to get too too alarmed, because acceptance rates can be misleading. And we've talked about this before and in other webinars. When you're applying to a state school, you're factoring in-state and out-of-state students. You're also factoring in other schools, early decision versus not early decision. So you really have to go delve deep into what those acceptance rates mean. And then the one thing I want everyone to understand is that there are a tremendous amount of factors that go into a decision. So not to get too obsessed with scattergrams. I know a lot of people have a hard time not looking at those, but it is a holistic process, and there are a lot of factors that go into a decision.
Now, Kristin, speaking of that, what are colleges looking for? If it's harder to get in and there's more kids than ever, what sets kids apart?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so when I was at UVA and I was evaluating students, what I would ask myself when I was looking at their information is, what is this student's unique voice? What is their unique perspective? Because the answer to that is, how are they going to contribute to my community, both in and out of the classroom? And so that's what colleges they're looking to answer that question. What contribution can your student make to my college? And the answer to that is found in a number of different ways. You've got to get that unique voice, unique perspective out and show in your personality. And so there are a number of factors that are important. One of those, thirst for learning, love of learning, curiosity. That's a characteristic that colleges want to see. Another is taking risks, taking initiatives. Did your student, go out for that play or go out for that team or start their own community service initiative project? That's a characteristic that colleges are looking for. Another one would be, making a contribution in some form, whether that be in a club or in a classroom, or even maybe they take care of younger siblings at home. So that having that responsibility and making some sort of a positive impact in some sort of community. I think perseverance and resilience is another factor that colleges are looking for. And then the last one, which to me, when I was reviewing applicants, is really a non-negotiable, is some sort of social consciousness, looking outside oneself and giving back to a community in some form. So that's what colleges are looking for in an applicant now.
It sounds like you really have to find what's unique about you, as you mentioned,
Yes.
really showing your personality.
Yes.
Can you think of a specific situation where you had a student who came to you feeling like kind of average? And I know a lot of kids do. They think, like, what is unique about me? How do you help them to find their uniqueness?
Absolutely. And all the time. I mean, it's asking a lot for a 15, 16, 17-year-old student to sit there and say, what am I passionate about? What am I interested in? What is my unique perspective? I mean, I'm in my 50s and some days I don't know what that is. So it is a lot to ask a student. So it's one of my favorite part of working with students, because everyone has something that's unique and special about them, and helping them realize that, that I take care of my younger siblings in the summer because both my parents work. To me, that's just normal, but actually that really shows a tremendous amount of responsibility. That shows leadership. That is something that's super compelling to a college. A student would never have thought of that. Or maybe you have a student who is really interested in animals, and so they started their own pet sitting business, or they work at an animal shelter. I mean, that is a unique voice and a unique perspective. They may not realize that, but that's something that we help them uncover. And that's what's really fun about this type of work.
So it sounds like you kind of have to package yourself in a way.
Absolutely. And then students will ask, well, how do you package yourself? And we've talked about this before, and it's always creating that narrative. What is that unique voice, that unique perspective? And so there's a number of places that you find that in a student. One is the types of courses they take. Two is quite obvious. What do they do when they're not in the classroom? So that's one thing. And then another thing would be teachers. What are teachers saying about them? I think seniors or parents of seniors who are on tonight's webinar already know about having to secure teacher recommendations for a lot of schools. And then counselors, of course. And then, of course, the dreaded 5-letter word that students don't like to hear, essay. What does the student have to say through their own words, their own unique voice, about what they're passionate about what they're interested in, about what their perspective is. Those are things that we help elevate that narrative, what their voice is in the application.
So I bet parents are thinking, oh my gosh, it feels late to do all of these things. What should seniors be doing now?
Sure, absolutely. And, it's not too late. But it is go time, like you said at the beginning when we got together tonight, but it is not too late. So I don't want people to feel disheartened at all. A number of things that students should be doing now, I literally just got off with a student before we got on this webinar, was make sure that they've asked teachers for recommendations. Normally, I have students ask in the spring just to secure them, but that does not mean that cannot happen now. So if your student has not already asked 1 or 2 teachers for a recommendation, I would have them do it before the end of next week for sure. The other thing is you would want to provide those recommenders with a resume or some information about your student, because they know how wonderful they are in the classroom, but they may not know all the things that they do outside the classroom. And as I talked about a few minutes ago, one of the important things that evaluators are looking at to understand a student is the recommendation. And so you want to provide them with enough information to write really personal, detailed, robust recommendations. So that's something that students should definitely be doing right now. The other thing that they should be doing is a lot of schools have colleges coming to campus doing information sessions. They may have already started, or they'll be starting in the next few weeks and continuing through the fall. I highly recommend that students go to those information sessions for the schools that are on their list, or that they think they would be interested applying to. There's a good chance that representative may be the person reading your recommendation. And so it's really important. I know that students have to get out of school for those, so I would be really selective about the ones, get out of class for, really selective about the ones that you go to, but I think that's definitely something that they should be doing. The other thing they should be doing, if they haven't done it already, is opening that Common App account. The Common Application is taken by well over 1,000 colleges in the U.S. And so students want to open an account and they want to start filling it out. There is an activities section and there is an essay section that require a little bit more time. The other stuff is more filling out regular questions. And then working on that list is important right now to be doing that.
I know we're going to get to that in just a moment.
Yeah.
But Kristin, it's also really normal for kids to come to you at all different places in their college search. And before we got on tonight, you said, oh, I just had a student click submit to all their schools, which is amazing. That must have felt great. But I know you also are taking kids that haven't really done anything yet.
Yes.
They're just starting out in the process, where it sounds like kids can run the gamut, and that's okay.
Yeah, that is okay. I mean, I think right now is the time to start thinking about it. So the people that are on tonight, kudos to you for being here. Definitely now is the time, because most schools, especially for transcript requests, which colleges require a transcript, most schools in the Northern Virginia area or in other states require at least a 2 to 3 week, maybe even a 4-week turnaround to get those transcripts sent to colleges. And colleges will not start reviewing a student's application, and they will not consider it completed unless they have that transcript. So you do need lead time. So one of the things I would definitely also be doing right now is looking at your individual school, what is their requirement, what forms need to be completed, when do they have to be completed by, in order to get that to get those applications fully complete to the colleges.
And I know that you sometimes have to handhold kids and make sure that they're doing all of these things.
Absolutely,
I can't.
Absolutely, I can't tell you how many times we've shared screens, and we literally have had the Common App up, and we've gone question by question, and that's okay. If that's what's needed to support a student, that's what we're here for.
Kristin, you mentioned the transcript, and So I'd love to talk a little bit about grades right
Sure.
now. I know that you've talked about an upwards trajectory, and that's really what schools want to see. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, plenty of times when I have a student come to me and say, like, I blew my ninth grade year. Like, I'm doomed. I'm never going to get into a school. And that's not the case. First of all, there's a college for everyone, which we'll talk about later. But second of all, an upward trajectory is super compelling. I can't tell you how many times when I was at UVA, you would see a student, sometimes the acclimating to high school can be difficult. And so the ninth grade can be a little bumpy. And that's okay. But if a student is showing progressive upward trend, that is really compelling. The other thing we want to see, besides only not just a grade trajectory, we want to see a program rigor trajectory. So a lot of people, I think when I was in high school, it was like the senior slump, and you kind of took, home ec and, metal shop, and that was it in senior year. But nowadays, your senior year should be your most rigorous program. So if you've been taking the highest level of courses in your school already, then you continue that through senior year. But if you have been slowly, maybe taken one AP in 11th or one AP in 10th, by now you should have a couple more under your belt because senior year really should be the most rigorous year.
And it's definitely a shift. Because I know when we were kids, everybody slacked off their senior year.
Absolutely.
But now it's really important because colleges use the wait list so significantly.
True.
And if you are waitlisted, you definitely want to show your best grades.
Absolutely.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on why those grades are so important in the senior year?
Sure, absolutely. And that's a really good point that you brought up, Anne. So like if a student has maybe feels that their grades are not an accurate reflection of their aptitude or their abilities, sometimes I recommend students not apply early action, but they wait till regular decision so that colleges can see that first semester grade performance. So if maybe their 11th grade was a little challenging, but then they knock it out of the park first semester senior year, that's definitely something that's compelling to colleges. And then, like you said, the wait list has become very important with those huge increase in applications. And so with a wait list, or when students are deferred, they're going to see those mid-year grades. In fact, when I was at UVA, you would wait until you got those mid-year grades to see how they were. So really important for students to still keep the pedal down to the metal for that first semester.
So we know that grades are important. And it used to be that these were the two factors, grades and test scores, not so much anymore. To your point, it's more about your personal narrative. But when it comes to test scores, what are you sharing with kids about actually taking the SAT or the ACT and then submitting scores?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's wonderful that we have the luxury of a test optional landscape so that you have that opportunity there if you are not a great test taker to still be able to apply to schools that you may not been able to otherwise. But testing can be a differentiator. So if your student is a good test taker, that is something that can set them apart than the person sitting next to them in their class, which is what colleges are looking at because you are being compared to the students in your high school. So if you are a good test taker, definitely you should be prepping and taking those tests. And if you still, like maybe you have a mediocre score right now, but you feel that you have some time to do some self-study, or Anne's going to talk about some other things, then definitely go for it because it's just one more thing if you have a good score that will set you apart from somewhere else. And when you ask what a good score is, that's going to depend on the schools you're applying to. And that's one thing that we do here at EC is that we'll look at your test scores and we'll help you decide strategically whether you'll submit a score to one school versus another school. If you're not in the upper percentage your score isn't in the upper percentage of students who are accepted to that school, then we don't recommend that you submit that score. I can't tell you how many times I was at UVA after we went into a test optional landscape that I would see a student and be evaluating them, and then there would be a test score, and I'd be like, why did you submit that score? Because now I have to factor it in. Whereas if you hadn't submitted it, then there was no harm, no foul.
And I guess you can't unsee it.
You can't unsee it. If they've checked that box saying, see my score, factor in my score, then you have to.
Yeah. It seems that test scores are so strategic now. Whereas 5 or 10 years ago, it wasn't at all like it is now. It was just that you took a test and you submitted your scores. But now, as you said, you have to be strategic because everybody is. Really. You only want to submit certain scores to certain schools. But in general, what we found in talking to and working with lots of kids over the years, that test scores can be a differentiator. It's another data point for colleges. How can that data point help colleges make decisions?
So, I mean, especially for highly competitive schools, I've got some data that still 47% of people who submit a Common App submit their test score. And for schools like a UPenn or an Emory or a Georgia Tech, you're seeing students who are accepted. There's a predominant percentage that have submitted scores. So as you said, Anne, it is that differentiator because you're getting lots of kids who have great grades and great things that they're doing outside of the classroom. And so that test score is just one more thing that can set them apart from someone else. And when we've been talking about SAT and ACT, but I'm also want to bring in AP scores or IB scores. So that's another thing that's strategic. We look at those scores and we tell students, we give them strategies of whether to submit those or not as well.
That's a great point, because sometimes kids get an AP score and they think, oh, I'll just submit this to everybody, or they don't really think about it in a strategic way. How can that help them?
So depending on the school you're applying to, I mean, I would say if you have a 4 or 5, submit the score. If you have a 1 or a 2, don't submit the score. And if you have a 3, it's going to depend on the school. And we talk about that. But whereas before, when I was evaluating students and I would see a student took an AP class and I didn't see a score, I'd be like, that's kind of interesting. But nowadays, in this kind of test optional world that we live in, it just doesn't have the same credence that it used to anymore.
Thanks for that, Kristin. So let's take a look at the upcoming SAT and ACT dates. And I will preface this by saying I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the digital SAT. So that will not come out until March of next year. So for now, your student can still take a paper and pencil SAT. And these are the upcoming dates: October 7th, November 4th, and December 2nd. And when it comes to the ACT, they have a September date, late October and December. So if your student is applying early decision or early action, they can still take a test in the fall. They can take the October 7th SAT or the September 9th ACT. And depending on when the early action date is or early decision, they could potentially take up to the October 28th ACT. Can you talk a little bit about those dates and the difference between early action, early decision, and regular decision, Kristin?
Sure, absolutely. It can get really confusing because all the names kind of sound the same. But there are a number of ways a student can apply. So they can apply what's called early decision. And if you think about it, decision, final, it's a way to differentiate from early action. Early decision is binding. It's a binding contract between the student, the counselor, the college, and the parent. If you can only apply to one of these you can only apply to one school early decision. And if you are accepted, you must go. The only way out of it is if you do not have the financial aid package that you need in order to attend that school. So that's early decision. And those dates are normally November 1st. As I said, that is not all schools have early decision, but a lot of schools do. Second thing is early action. Early action is just being able to apply early to a school and find out early. It is not binding. You can apply to as many early action schools as you want to. The southern schools like Clemson has an October 15th deadline. So we're already coming up, getting to those. A lot of schools have a November 1st, and then a number of other ones have a November 15th. And then there's another batch that has a December 1st. There are schools that don't have either early decision and early action, or they only have regular decision, or they'll have early action and they'll have regular decision. Regular decision is usually can be from a December 1st into a February deadline. It just depends when a school decides to do that. And then I just want to say, if you apply early action, you will find out normally in a January sometime. And if you apply early decision, you usually find out mid-December. And then if you apply regular decision, you can find out anytime between February and April 1st is the deadline usually. And then just to make things complicated, let's throw in one other called rolling admissions. And rolling admissions is literally what it sounds like. It's rolling. So the Common App opened August 1st. So for some schools, you could have applied August 1st to a school and you will have your decision within 4 to 8 weeks. Schools like West Virginia University is a school that has rolling admissions. There's a number of schools that have rolling admissions. And so when you apply 4 to 8 weeks, you find out the answer. So the strategy would be to apply early to those types of schools, because if you think about it, they're filling their class. It's rolling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense, Kristin. So really, if you decide to apply early action, early decision, or regular decision, and the dates of those, that's going to tell you when the last date is that you can take an SAT or ACT. And it's usually about a 2-week turnaround. And the test scores will go directly from the test provider to the college. So all things to think about when we think of testing. It isn't too late if you have a child who wants to take a test, or it could potentially help them. And we believe that every kid should take a test so they have that score to use it when they need to or not. It's just one more tool that can help you in your applications. But it's not too late to get preparation. We provide test prep to lots of seniors this time of year that even just want to get a few sessions in before they sit and take a test. And if this could be helpful to you, you can learn more about our test preparation programs by grabbing your phone and scanning this QR code. Or you can just go to our website, which is ectutoring.com/test-prep, and it will show you all of our programs. The other thing I wanted to mention is that schools do not have a preference whether your child takes the SAT or the ACT. If schools are going to look at a test, they treat both of them equally, and it doesn't matter. What we often find is that kids will have a preference for a test. Sometimes they've taken the PSAT for multiple years, so they're just going to go the route of the SAT. Sometimes they may have taken a practice ACT, and that feels more like school to them. The test questions seem easier, so that's the test they take. And we can help you and your student figure out which test to take. You don't have to take both tests. Really, we find the best bang is when students decide on a test and they prep just for that test and take that test. Usually once, twice, sometimes 3 times. But at this time of year, it might just be once. So, Kristin, moving on from test scores, we talked a little bit about the application deadline, and you did touch on when things are due. Mm-hmm. What is important for parents to know and kids to know right now when deadlines are fast approaching?
So the process is complicated enough as it is that you would hate to not be able to be considered for a school that you are really interested in because you missed a deadline or you missed turning in a transcript request so that they didn't get your transcript. Colleges will not review an applicant if they don't have a complete application. And so that will be the Common App or their specific application. You can do one or the other, or the Coalition, which is another whole other application. But normally the Common App or that school's specific application, their transcript, and then that coming directly from the school. Students do not have anything to do with, colleges actually will not accept transcripts directly from students. They have to come from their school. And then counselors send what's called a secondary school report with their recommendation. So sometimes colleges will look at applications without teacher recs in, but they will not look at them if they do not have those components we talked about: the application, the transcript, If it's a school that requires testing, and there are schools, not all schools are test optional, they also will not complete an application unless they have the testing scores. And scores have to come directly from either the College Board or the ACT. They cannot be sent by the student, and they cannot be sent by the school.
Kristin, thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've noticed in talking to lots of parents, and I know Erin, our director of college counseling, when she does those initial calls with parents, she finds that a lot of times kids have thought about what their list of colleges is going to look like, and it ends up being kind of top heavy, meaning that they have an awful lot of schools that are reach schools for them. But in reality, they're going to have better results if they still have some of those schools, but they have a more balanced list. How does a student create a balanced list? How do you go about that?
Sure, absolutely. And you're right. And I had a student already today who came with 6 schools, of which all of them were reaches, and not because the student wasn't fabulous, but because they're all super highly selective schools with really low acceptance rates. If a school has under, I would say 10 for sure, but even 15% acceptance rate, it's going to be a reach for everyone. And so when we talk about a balanced list, we're talking about reaches, which Anna and I were just talking about, which are schools where your student's GPA may be maybe lower than what the average student accepted to that school is. Then there are target schools, and those are where your student's GPA and testing, if they choose to submit, falls within kind of the range of the majority of students who are accepted. And then we have what most people call safeties. I call them most likelies. And those are schools where your student's GPA and testing, if they choose to submit, is higher than what the average student is accepted to that school. And so we like to see students have what's called a balance list. You want some most likelies, you want some targets, and you want some reaches. And we get asked all the time, well, what's the magic number that students should apply to? And that really is dependent on the student. I've had students who apply only to 6 schools, but it's a balanced list, or even 5 schools, but it's a balanced list. And then I have other students who they want to apply to 15. I don't recommend that, but if that's what they want to do, I'm along for the ride, and I'll support them. But somewhere between 7 and 12 is kind of the average that students apply to. But really finding that balanced list is super important. And so for the student I met with earlier today, they were very well aware that their list was reach heavy. And so they've asked me to help them find target and safety schools for them. So it's not unusual, but you really want to make sure you've got that balanced list.
I love that the student was open to that.
I was so happy, because a lot of times that's not the case. So it was they understood.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. So it kind of brings us to our next topic of really finding the fit, because it's not all about, will I get into this school, but is this school right for me?
Right. Absolutely. And at EC, that is really what we're most concerned about. That's where we put our emphasis in. A match, like we talk about match versus fit. Match are those schools where your GPA, your testing, your data kind of falls within that school. But for us, it's really important that a fit be there for a student. And what that means is we have ongoing conversations with students about what are you looking for in a college experience. And so and sometimes it's hard to know what you want in a college experience. So we have a lot of questions. We do a lot of soul searching. We talk about what brings you joy and what's important to you in your life. Because this is 4 years. These are important years, and you want a student to go somewhere where they feel comfortable, where they feel they can pursue those things that they're interested in. So finding those fit schools is really important. And so we do a lot of conversation talking to find that.
I know you also use an assessment to help them. Tell us a little bit about that.
We do. So at EC, we have kind of a Myers-Briggs assessment personality. And then we also have something which is called an intelligence test, which helps students ascertain where their best style of learning is. And it's really, I love doing them. They're super fun, because I love to say to the kids, is that accurate? Do you feel like that's you? And it is. It's almost every time it's exactly what the student is. So they're really fun, and we can do those with students.
I love that, because I know a lot of kids come to us feeling like, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what a good fit school is, and finding their uniqueness and maybe even what they want to major in, which drives
Absolutely.
the schools on their list. And I know you're also a big believer in thinking outside the box and getting creative with kids.
Absolutely, because when we started tonight, we started talking about admissions rates and acceptance rates and all those things. And so it seems, and it's just kind of human nature, that the same 20 schools are on the tips of everyone's tongue. But there are thousands of schools out there that are wonderful and can provide students with wonderful opportunities. They all have great professors and great classes and clubs and study abroad programs and internships. And it's really what you make of that experience. So I love students who are open, like the one I had earlier, to really thinking about other schools that they may not have thought about. So it also requires a bunch of research on the student's part as well. But, there are schools out there, like, let's say it's really important that your student wants academic freedom. They don't want to be bogged down by a ton of prerequisites, finding schools like that out there for them, or they're really into research. So finding schools that have a real emphasis on research, or maybe they're really interested in business and they don't want to apply 2 years into their college to see if they get into a business school. They want to do a direct admit program where they can go right into the business school like Indiana and Michigan State have. So asking them those types of questions, but there are schools out there like Babson, which a lot of people maybe not even know of. It's a school outside of Boston that has one of the best entrepreneurship programs in the world, not even just in the country. Or maybe your student's really into musical theater. The University of Cincinnati has one of the top programs in the country. Not a school on everyone's tips of everyone's tongue, a fabulous school. Elon is another one. If you're really into nursing, University of Rochester has one of the best nursing programs in the country. So these are schools that maybe aren't on everyone's tips of everyone's tongue, but they have amazing programs. I had a student last year who I've talked to you about this student before, Anne, who wanted to go into aerospace engineering, and they wanted to go to Virginia Tech, and they didn't get into Virginia Tech, and they were crushed. And but they got into Illinois, and they ended up going to Illinois, and Illinois actually has one of the top 7 aerospace engineering programs in the country, whereas Virginia Tech, a wonderful school, but has a program not nearly as rated as high. But, Virginia Tech was kind of on the tip of everyone's tongue, and maybe not Illinois. So it just goes to show that doing your research, really looking for those schools out there, because there are so many out there that are just fabulous that people don't even talk about very often.
So it sounds like, Kristin, at the end of the day, that there's definitely a strategic approach for seniors. It's definitely not like it was just a few years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Being strategic is, and I hate, we use that word a lot, but it really is the best way to define what we're doing. There's a strategy in every part of the application process, in how you list your activities in your activities section, in what you decide to talk about in your essays, in how you decide what schools you're going to apply to and when you're going to apply to them. Are you going to apply early decision? Are you going to apply early action or regular decision? Are you going to submit testing scores or not? I mean, we've talked about all those things tonight, and every single one of them is a strategic decision that has to be made. And all of them in the hopes of presenting your student in the best light and elevating their narrative.
And it also is something you have to keep track of. It's a lot of moving pieces. And I often think we've talked a lot about executive functions. These are skills like being organized and planning ahead, and being able to start on something in a reasonable amount of time, basically keeping track of things. I don't think there's any other time in a child's high school career that executive function skills are taxed the most than when they're applying to college. And so they need a system for keeping track.
They do, absolutely. And this more than anyone, and being an expert in executive functioning, that, one tool may work for one student and may not work for another. So I have some students where we use a chart, and we only put one thing on the chart at a time. And I have other students where we have like a big complex Excel sheet, and it just depends on the student. But keeping track is super important, especially like we've talked tonight, all these different deadlines flying out there and all these different components of the application that need to be done. So really important to help your student, support them in getting everything maybe on a master sheet, and writing down those deadlines and the different components of the application and when they're due.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristin. We're going to go to questions in just a moment. So if you have a question for Kristin, now would be a great time to put it in the chat. And I want to introduce you to Erin. I mentioned her earlier tonight, but Erin is our director of college consulting. And if your senior needs help in empowering through applications at this time of year, we're happy to help him or her. Erin would be the best person to talk to get started, whether you want to work with Kristin or our other two college consultants, Lisa and David. And you can scan this QR code and that will set up an appointment with Erin so you can talk about your child's situation. And I know, Kristin, as you mentioned earlier, that at the end of the day, you really, really believe that there is a college out there for every student.
I absolutely do. College is a really important part in life, but there are a lot of other things that are important in life as well. And where you go to college, I'm a firm believer, will not define how happy or how successful you will be. And it's really just finding that place for the student where they feel most comfortable, where they can experience the most personal and academic growth. That's really what we're striving to do.
Thanks for that, Kristin. That kind of puts it in perspective for all of us. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We're going to go to questions in just a moment. On behalf of Kristin and myself, I so appreciate you joining us tonight. And I also wanted to let you know that we have a really special event coming up next week. We have a summit for parents, and it's called Opening the Door to Learning for Students with ADHD. And it's each day we have a different topic that starts at 1 o'clock. And Monday through Friday, we have Michelle talking about parenting, Robert Brooks talking about motivation and resilience, Cliff Sussman talking about digital addiction. Kristin, you're joining us to talk specifically about college planning for students with ADHD and learning disabilities. And then Kathy is talking with us about organization and time management for students with ADHD. So I hope that you will join us. You can register by going to our website, ectutoring.com/ADHD-summit. All right, so I'd love to get to our questions. And by the way, after we do questions, there will be a survey that pops up on your screen. And if you would be so kind to answer that survey, it helps us to determine what was helpful to you and what we can provide in the future. All right, so let's take a look at our questions. And there are a lot of them. When I asked earlier tonight, I asked what brought people here, and I'd love to share some of the things that you mentioned. Helping kids stay organized and meet those deadlines. Essay tips, I know you covered that, Kristin. And one dad said, I want to make sure that the colleges my child's applying to actually make sense for personality and interest. And Justin, that is so, so true. That's probably one of the most important things we do for kids. All right, so let's see. Let's go to a couple of questions. Paresh says, my son wants to retake the verbal portion of the SAT and not the math. How do you handle that? You can't just retake one section. You have to take the whole thing, but most colleges will super score. That means they'll take your best section. Let's say you take it twice, and once you did well on math here, but not the reading and writing, and the next time you did the opposite. The software will cherry pick your best scores from both tests, put them together, your best verbal, your best math, and that's the score that colleges will see. So most schools do super score, and we believe that will continue with the digital SAT, although that won't matter to seniors, but if you have an upcoming junior, it will matter to them. All right, how do we make extracurriculars really shine on the application? That's from Ruth, and she also asks, Kristin, is it better to apply early action, regular decision? Should I wait to see if the SAT scores improve or the GPA improves? What do you think about that, especially that last question? How do you
Sure.
know
So,
early decision?
well, that's
How do I know early decision? So early decision, your student is a candidate for early decision if they, and this is what I ask students when they're like, well, I'm not really sure. I say, if you got into this school and you got into all these other schools and you're still happy going to this school and are really, joyful about that, then you're a candidate for early decision. If you don't feel that way, then you're not a candidate for it. I'm a huge proponent of early decision just by the sheer numbers. When you see the acceptance rates for schools, early decision is now, some people are calling it the new regular decision because colleges are filling 50, 60% of their classes with early decision and early action candidates because it just helps their yields rates that much more. So it's not for everyone, but if your student is in that kind of frame of thought where there is one school that's just above all others, then they may be a candidate for early decision. And I apologize, Anne, I missed I forgot now the first part of the question.
That's okay. Ruth asked, they're really kind of two different questions. How do you make extracurriculars shine on the application?
Right. So I would say that well, first of all, we are very strategic in how we do the activities section of the Common App. You only have 140 characters in the description to talk about your impact and what you do in the activities that you do. It's not words, it's characters. So it's not a lot of room. So we're very strategic in what we say. Every word counts. So that's one thing in the activities section. Another way to really highlight what you do in your activities is through your essays. You'll see that colleges are very, and I think we're overusing the word tonight, strategic, but they are in the questions that they ask students. They're really trying to glean that information about what that student can contribute to their community, and also to each college community is not the same. You have some schools that put a real emphasis on research, or you have some schools that put a real emphasis in collaboration. And so making sure that your student is elevating those characteristics for that school in their essay is really important. You're going to see in those supplemental essays, which are those smaller school specific essays, so many why my school essays. And why my school essays are really a why my school, but also why this student essay. So I have students answer those why my school essays as a two-prong. Why the school, why the student.
I really like that approach. It makes sense, and that's definitely a differentiator. Kristin, Jung asks, do you think having affirmative action removed now that colleges like Virginia Tech and University of Maryland College Park, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on their admissions?
So I've gotten that question a lot. I don't know if everyone's familiar that the Supreme Court came down with a decision in June about how Harvard and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, were evaluating students. And so they did away with what is called affirmative action. I personally do not feel like colleges are going to be evaluating their students any differently than they ever were. Diversity, and that's diversity not only in race, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, but it's also in perspectives, viewpoints, backgrounds, experiences. Those are always going to be important to colleges because the more diverse your community, the more dynamic and exciting your learning environment. And colleges are not going to change that.
Barb asked about schools that grade in quarters. So if the second quarter isn't complete by the time the application is due, should the student have the first quarter? I think this parent is asking, should the first quarter grades be submitted?
so.
Most all colleges look at the cumulative junior GPA in evaluating a student. So they're not going to look there. If your student evaluates by quarter, then they're going to look at those mid-year grades if your student waits to apply regular decision. So that would be the first and second quarter. Otherwise, all schools look at the cumulative junior year, end of junior year GPA. Does that make sense?
Yep, sure does. Okay. How do you submit your AP scores?
So AP scores are, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
AP scores are submitted through the College Board. And the beauty is you can cherry pick which scores you submit and which you don't. So if you get a 5 on the AP BC Calc and you get a 2 on the French, you can submit the Calc and forget the French. That's the beauty of AP scores.
Justin asked, do you think it's just easier to manage the flow of applications just to apply early action and forget regular decision? Or what do you think, Kristin?
So I would say for almost all my students, except for the students who really need that first semester grades because they just did not have the academic performance that they wanted to the schools that they want to apply to. I recommend early action for all my students.
We have a couple of questions about homeschoolers. What do you do about homeschoolers' transcripts because they don't have records from the school districts? I know they still have grades, but what if they won't accept them from, you said that they won't accept them from the student themselves. How does that work?
So homeschooling is a different animal altogether. So if you are working through a cooperative or if the parent is the counselor, then they need to come from that third party, the transcript that is written up. I would look at each school that your student is applying to. I would look at the requirements for admission for homeschooled students because they vary by school. And if you don't see it on their website, a lot of them have it posted on their website, call the admissions office.
And it's something that we don't think of, but that's what the admissions offices are there for. We can't be afraid to call and ask questions.
I call all the time. I call admissions offices.
I know for my kids, I call too. So Caroline says, what about a student that has really limited extracurriculars, but good grades? How do you help them to shine when, maybe they don't have all the other things on their activities list that other students do?
Well, I think as we talked about at the beginning of when we started, every student has something special and unique about them. And so I would go into the application process just celebrating whatever those things are and not making excuses for what you think there may be a deficiency in, which you may not even be accurate about. So like if your student is a national merit finalist and is in every honor society, or they have A+ and they've taken the hardest program at your school, elevate that in the application, in your essays. Talk about that commitment and that thirst for knowledge and that curiosity. Maybe they're a voracious reader, or maybe they dive deep into documentaries and learn everything they can about World War II. That's fascinating. Talk about those things.
Kara asks, can you please repeat the time period, junior or senior year, that schools look for grades?
So they want the cumulative GPA that you will have posted on your transcript at the end of junior year. So that will be all of 9th grade, all of 10th grade, and all of 11th grade. That GPA is the GPA that most colleges go off of.
Thank you. Someone asked, do you know if National Merit Scholarship info is out yet this month? September 2023?
It is, because I have students who've already gotten notifications.
Thank you for that. And then Gloria asked again about homeschooling. She said, what if the parent is the teacher? How do they submit? It sounds like they really need to go to the school's website and
they need to go to the school's website. But I think I mentioned, if the parent is the teacher, is the counselor, then they are the one that submits.
Okay, thank you. Cindy says, what if your child needs senior year grades to pull up their GPA? Do you just apply early decision and hope they look at them, or is the school required to look at them? So
if you are applying regular decision, then more times than not, they wait for those mid-year grades. And you hope that your school gets them out, your high school gets them out in time. Got it. That makes sense. And Lori says, thank you. All right. So those are the end of our questions tonight. Kristin, thank you so much. This has been so amazing. I learned a lot myself, and I hope the parents out there did too.
And I also hope we've given you enough information to make the best of what's remaining in the senior year and to get everything done on time. And again, we are happy to help should you need it. There will be a survey to pop up at the end. If you don't mind waiting for that, that would be wonderful. Kristin, thank you. As always, you're amazing.
Thanks so much, Anne. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for being on tonight. And I look forward to seeing you next week at our summit. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.